You awaken to the chime of church bells resonating through stone hallways, their metallic tones summoning believers to dawn devotions. The era is 1491 AD, and you serve as an attendant to the mightiest female in Christendom, Isabella I of Castile, Spain's sovereign. Your uncovered feet meet chilly marble while you rush across the Alcazar of Segovia, holding a bowl of scented water and clean cloths. The atmosphere carries hints of sacred smoke and another odor, something acrid and natural that churns your insides. You halt beyond the regal quarters, hearing the monarch's words pass the thick wooden portals. She is reciting prayers once more, as she has for extended periods. Her phrases ebb and flow like a stream of ancient tongue, accented by the gentle rustle of prayer beads gliding across her digits. Upon finally stepping inside, you observe her bent before a grand cross, clad in the identical pale fabric chemise she donned 3 months earlier when Granada yielded to faithful armies. The material, formerly pristine as new fallen snow, now displays yellowish marks from perspiration, brownish spots of crimson from her self-inflicted scourging, and deeper blemishes you hesitate to ponder. The aroma strikes you like a forceful impact, blending with the smoldering and metallic burners, forming a sickening blend of holiness and deterioration. You place the container and proceed cautiously, aware that disrupting her worship might lead to confinement or graver penalties. Yet as you near, you spot something that chills your veins. Small black dots crawl over the soiled cloth. Lice. Scores of them thriving and multiplying within the creases of her unclean attire. Before delving into these overlooked tales of endurance and hardship, if you appreciate discovering concealed fact from the past, think about pressing that approval icon and joining for additional materials similar to this. And kindly share in the remarks section from which location you're tuning in. I consider it remarkable that we're examining these antique narratives collectively from various global spots, linked through eras and distances by our mutual interest in bygone times. The narrative you've recently stepped into isn't completely accurate, but neither is it wholly invented. For ages, a stubborn legend has adhered to the legacy of Isabella I of Castile, the formidable ruler who consolidated Spain and sponsored Christopher Columbus's expedition to distant horizons. Per this folklore, Isabella swore a holy pledge to avoid replacing her intimate apparel until Granada, the final Islamic bastion in Iberia, succumbed to the victors. The blockade endured 8 months, and allegedly so did her soiled intimates. Certain renditions assert she maintained the same chemise for 8 years. Others argue it involved a separate Iberian sovereign altogether, maybe one of the subsequent Habsburg leaders, noted for their zealous faith and bodily oddities. The particulars fluctuate like grains in a storm, but the fundamental picture endures: a commanding female propelled by radical piety, existing in squalor that would repel a common laborer. Contemporary experts mostly discard this account as misinformation, a tactic to either canonize Isabella as a sufferer for belief or defame her as a devout radical, based on the narrator's bias. However, the reality that such a narrative could arise, disseminate, and linger for more than 500 years reveals something deep about the society Isabella occupied, a domain where the border between piety and terror often blurred beyond distinction. To fathom why this legend appears so convincing, we need to plunge into the medieval psyche and scrutinize the peculiar link between grime, sanctity, and authority in late 15th century Iberia. We have to investigate a society where washing was regarded not merely superfluous, but genuinely risky, where inner clothes served as enchanted safeguards, and where Earth's most dominant figures existed in states that would appall a contemporary refuge for the needy. The Iberia, during Isabella's epoch, was a territory suspended between realms. Faithful domains had devoted 7 centuries gradually displacing Islamic overlords southward, a movement termed the Reconquista that would at last conclude with Isabella's seizure of Granada in 1492 AD. This wasn't solely a combat operation, but a societal clash that influenced every element of routine living, encompassing the most personal facets of bodily upkeep. In the Muslim territories of Al-Andalus, cleansing was both a spiritual duty and a communal ceremony. Community wash facilities, known as hammams, were scattered across major urban areas. Adherents purified themselves 5 times each day prior to supplications, and the holy text overtly commended purity as half of devotion. These venues were building masterpieces, vaulted rooms equipped with warmed basins where males and females in distinct sessions would linger for hours immersing, abrading, and conversing. The fluid was directed via clever arrangements of conduits and waterways, numerous originating from classical periods. But in the devoted realms that would form Spain, immersion bore a dreadful disgrace. Religious overseers perceived public cleansings as hubs of wrongdoing, spots where bare forms intermingled in misty gloom, where separations between masculine and feminine, elite and ordinary, evaporated in the equalizing clasp of steaming liquid. Even worse, bathing was tied to Islam, Judaism, and heathenism, all foes of the authentic creed. Saint Jerome, an initial ecclesiastical patriarch, had stated that those cleansed in Christ required no additional rinse. This formed the doctrinal base for eras of devoted impurity. To purify the form was to erase the shield of christening, to welcome spirits into openings made susceptible by cleanser and fluid. The genuinely sacred, it was thought, ought to aroma like witnesses of gore, exertion, and holy torment. Isabella matured in this realm of consecrated dirt. Born in 1451 AD within the settlement of Madrigal de las Altas Torres, she was the child of John II of Castile and Isabel of Portugal. Her early days were defined by internal conflict, scheming plots, and perpetual risk of murder. In such a milieu, individual sanitation placed well below mere continuance. The sovereign assembly of her adolescence was a wandering metropolis of multitudes, aristocrats, aides, protectors, steeds, and canines, all journeying as one in an enormous train that shifted from fortress to fortress, depleting regional assets before advancing like a horde of pests. Envision the scent of such an aggregation. Uncleaned figures squeezed collectively in vast chambers, waste containers brimming with refuse, decaying meal remnants tossed to wild packs of hounds, mounts discharging wherever they halted. In the cold months of 1468 AD, when Isabella was merely 17, she beheld an event that would mold her perception of purity eternally. An eruption of pestilence assaulted the assembly while it lingered at the Alcazar of Segovia. The affliction, dubbed then as the Dark Demise, had been devastating Europe for over a century, claiming about 1/3 of inhabitants per strike. The scourge commenced, as it invariably did, with the rodents. They surfaced from crevices in full daylight, tottering and dropping, their pelts clumped with gore and ooze. Then arrived the fleas, swarms of them, frantically hunting fresh carriers as their animal bearers expired. Within hours, the initial humans started manifesting indications. Heat, shivers, and the signature swellings. Enlarged glands that might enlarge like fruits, packed with dark fluid and decay. Isabella observed as her personal staff succumbed, their forms dotted with somber blotches that lent the plague its title. She witnessed robust warriors diminish to sobbing youths, pleading for their kin as they expired in puddles of their own excrement. The assembly physicians, attired in their odd bird-like visors stuffed with fragrant plants, proved useless against the malady. They recommended draining, cleansing, and supplication, but demise arrived anyhow. What impressed Isabella most strongly was how the plague appeared to bypass the filthiest participants of the assembly. The culinary helpers coated in oil and scraps stayed robust. The barn lads who bedded alongside the equines and never rinsed exhibited no traces of sickness. But the elites who sporadically cleansed their palms and countenances perished in startling quantities. This insight, although rooted in chance rather than origin, would bolster Isabella's emerging conviction that sanitation was not merely extraneous, but possibly lethal. The authentically pious, she deduced, should rely on divine safeguarding instead of mortal solutions like lather and liquid. The devotional setting of Isabella's period rendered this reasoning appear not just sensible, but celestially guided. The closing years of the 1400s represented a time of profound mysticism in Iberian Christianity. Holy figures like Catherine of Siena and Francis of Assisi were honored for their intentional adoption of grime and debasement. Catherine allegedly consumed discharge from plague lesions, while Francis refrained from cleansing his digits after contacting outcasts. These venerated ones were not deranged, as current analysts might presume. They adhered to a refined doctrinal custom that regarded the form as a cage for the essence, a well of lure and transgression that demanded subjugation and repression. To tend to the physique, to rinse it, scent it, or decorate it, constituted the offense of conceit, to prioritize corporeal ease above ethereal rescue. This ideology hid its utmost expression in the ritual of self-scourging, which Isabella adopted with alarming zeal. Thrice per week, she would seal herself in her secluded shrine and bare to the midsection, employing a lash crafted from twisted strings. She would strike her spine and arms until crimson streamed down her hide, blending with the gathered soil and exertion of weeks' sans rinsing. The bodily anguish formed only portion of the ceremony. The mental outcome was just as crucial. By rendering her physique an origin of torment rather than delight, Isabella thought she was nearing closer to the Savior, who had agonized on the crucifix for mankind's misdeeds. The gore that congealed on her epidermis served not just proof of her piety, but a shielding veil against enticement and wrongdoing. Her intimates, the flaxen shifts positioned nearest her flesh, turned into vaults of this hallowed torment. They soaked up not merely her crimson, but her perspiration, her sorrows, and the assorted lubricants and discharges of her unclean form. Gradually, these attires acquired a nearly enchanted importance in Isabella's thoughts. They weren't simply apparel, but artifacts, tangible displays of her ethereal path. The particular legend regarding Isabella's intimates oath connects to the blockade of Granada, which started in April 1491 AD. This aimed to be the concluding clash of the Reconquista, the supreme trial of devoted conviction against Islamic defiance. As Isabella readied for what she recognized would be a prolonged effort, she allegedly uttered a pledge before the sanctuary of the temple in Córdoba. She would refrain from swapping her flaxen chemise until Granada yielded to faithful troops. Whether this oath was truly declared remains unverifiable, but it mirrors the mentality of the age. Medieval and Renaissance believers often forged such pacts with the divine, vowing to withstand particular adversities in trade for heavenly grace. These oaths were deemed obligatory agreements, upheld by the menace of perpetual condemnation. The blockade itself represented a triumph of medieval combat. Instead of trying to assault Granada's enormous barriers, Isabella and her spouse Ferdinand opted to famish the metropolis into capitulation. They constructed a fresh settlement named Santa Fe directly beyond Granada's fortifications, equipped with temples, bazaars, and governance structures. From this outpost, they methodically constricted the grip around the Muslim fortress. For 8 months, Isabella resided in Santa Fe, overseeing the blockade and sustaining the spirit of her forces. If she had genuinely sworn such an oath, the bodily and mental burden would have been vast. The Iberian springtime and summertime proved brutally sweltering, with heat soaring above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The environment teemed with particles, fumes from meal preparations, and the stench of countless unclean warriors. Accounts from the time portray Isabella in this phase as progressively thin and sunken-gazed, her visage etched with an unearthly fervor. She devoted much of her hours to supplication, frequently remaining upright for extended periods before a movable sanctuary in her pavilion. Guests mentioned that she appeared to exude a peculiar scent, not wholly disagreeable, but clearly biological, resembling aged hide combined with withered blooms. The The lice that purportedly swarmed her attire would have exceeded mere annoyance. In a medieval grasp of ailment, lice weren't solely vermin, but possible conduits of otherworldly taint. They linked to the adversary, who was frequently shown as a louse-ridden entity rising from infernal depths. To shelter lice meant inviting infernal sway. Nevertheless, Isabella seemed to accept them as tools of celestial examination. The mental repercussions of extended non-washing surpassed basic unease. Medieval healers, adhering to antique Hellenic concepts, held that the form's innate lubricants and emissions were vital for preserving the equilibrium of the four essences: gore, mucus, golden color, and dark color. To cleanse these elements away meant courting sickness and derangement. Isabella's conduct amid the blockade of Granada implies she might have undergone what contemporary mental experts would identify as a type of devotional delusion. She recounted regular apparitions of holy figures and celestial beings, professed to perceive sacred directives shaping her tactical approaches, and grew more distrustful regarding the allegiance of her counselors. Her denial to replace her undergarments could have functioned as both a trigger and an indicator of this cerebral condition. The wider framework of Iberian culture rendered Isabella's supposed actions not merely tolerable but commendable. Across the peninsula, anecdotes spread of sacred females who had attained sanctity via purposeful self-abasement. Maria de Santo Domingo, a peer of Isabella, allegedly avoided cleansing her palms for 30 years, insisting that purity signified ethereal frailty. Another visionary, Catalina de Cardona, was claimed to have donned the same coarse shirt for 40 years until it grew so embedded with gore and soil that it could remain vertical, unaided. These weren't solitary incidents, but components of a larger societal trend that linked corporeal agony with ethereal progress. The Iberian Inquisition, founded by Isabella in 1478 AD, vigorously advanced this doctrine as a method to distinguish genuine believers. Those who rinsed routinely, swapped their garb often, or displayed other marks of regard for physical solace faced suspicion of being hidden Muslims or concealed Jews, covertly observing the purification customs of their heritage beliefs. The healing comprehension of the era supplied scholarly validation for this organized disregard of sanitation. Healers thought the epidermis was a permeable shield that could weaken through overmuch rinsing. They instructed that specific advantageous mists, including those generated by unclean forms, could guard against malady, whereas the chill breeze that infiltrated via pristine openings might provoke illness. This notion gained strength from actual scrutiny. In a time preceding microbe awareness, when lather derived from alkali and timber residue, excessive cleansing frequently induced dermal annoyance and contamination. The affluent who could finance regular immersions often endured from hide ailments uncommon among the unclean impoverished. This established a reinforcement cycle that solidified the connection between purity and sickness. The distinct emphasis on intimates in the Isabella legend mirrors the medieval view of flax as an enchanted material. Unlike fleece or satin, which stemmed from beasts, flax originated from plant fibers and was deemed untainted and divine. It formed the cloth of celestial messengers, the substance for interment wraps. To don flax adjacent to the hide meant forging a defensive shield against malevolent forces. But this guarding strength was believed to amplify with duration and utilization. New flax was viewed as spiritually impartial, but flax that had imbibed the bearer's exertion, gore, and other corporal liquids grew imbued with their vital energy. The extended such attires were worn, the stronger they developed. This conviction clarifies why medieval venerated ones frequently donned identical flax chemises for years, regarding them as sacred artifacts. Isabella's assembly overflowed with such artifacts: garb, devotion strands, and additional items that had been worn or contacted by pious icons. These objects were thought to possess restorative abilities, and individuals would journey vast distances to embrace them or apply them to their ailing forms. If Isabella had truly maintained the same chemise for months amid the blockade of Granada, it would have ranked among the most potent artifacts in Christendom. The mental influence of donning progressively soiled intimates would have been intricate and significant. On one plane, it would have served as a perpetual prompt of Isabella's ethereal dedication, a corporeal expression of her readiness to endure for her creed. Each instance of discomfort, every irritation and annoyance would have transmuted into a devotion, a minor tribute to the divine. But the seclusion enforced by radical impurity would have been comparably noteworthy. As Isabella's individual sanitation worsened, she would have grown progressively detached from typical human interaction. Solely the most loyal aides would have consented to serve her intimately, and even they would have battled to conceal their aversion. This detachment would have heightened her pre-existing inclination toward mysticism and suspicion. The lice that reportedly overrun her garb would have contributed another stratum of mental anguish. Medieval folk held that lice were tiny fiends dispatched by the deceiver to afflict the pious. Each nip would have been construed as an ethereal challenge, a conflict between virtue and vice waged on the arena of Isabella's physique. The truth that she withstood this anguish sans grievance would have been perceived as testimony of her holiness. The wider ramifications of Isabella's supposed conduct stretched well past her individual ethereal voyage. As sovereign of Europe's most dominant realm, her deeds and demeanor established norms for the whole Iberian assembly. If she declined to swap her intimates, it turned stylish or at minimum permissible for her elites to emulate. Records from the era by overseas diplomats depicted the Iberian assembly as exceptionally odorous even by medieval measures. The Venetian representative Pietro Martiri Ingra penned in 1491 AD that nearing the Iberian regal vicinity demanded immense resolve of character and robust digestion. Meanwhile, the Gallic delegate Philippe de Comines observed that Iberian aristocrats appeared to display their unclean condition as an emblem of distinction. This societal endorsement of radical impurity bore tangible outcomes that reached far past issues of individual ease. The Iberian assembly evolved into a hotbed for ailment scares in other European domains. Dermal issues, gut invaders, and breathing contaminations thrived in a setting where fundamental sanitation was deliberately deterred. The lice that allegedly resided in Isabella's garb weren't merely a private woe, but a possible hazard to communal wellness. Medieval lice acted as transmitters for bubonic scourge, and a solitary infested person could ignite an outbreak that could slay thousands. The reality that Isabella endured her supposed trial might have stemmed from fortune, heavenly mediation, or merely the organic fact that certain individuals possess innate immunity to louse-borne maladies. The blockade of Granada ultimately concluded on January 2nd, 1492, when the Islamic chieftain Boabdil relinquished the metropolis to Isabella and Ferdinand. Per the legend, this marked the instant when Isabella at last exchanged her intimates following 8 months of uninterrupted use. The attire she discarded were allegedly so rigid with a mass grime that they could remain vertical unsupported, resembling armor forged from human discharges. Whether this particular is factual or not, the collapse of Granada did denote a pivotal shift in Isabella's existence and governance. With the reconquest finished, she could redirect her focus to other concerns, encompassing the backing of Christopher Columbus's journey to the New World, which would set sail merely 8 months afterward. The identical devotional passion that allegedly compelled her to maintain unwashed intimates would shortly impel her to disseminate Christianity to the Americas, with repercussions that would remodel the whole globe. The legend of Isabella's intimates oath also mirrors the tangled connection between authority and sanctity in medieval society. For a sovereign to purposefully demean herself via such radical impurity was ironically a showcase of her supreme control. Only an individual with total dominance could venture such exposure. Only someone whose status was impregnable could hazard such fragility. This interplay appears in numerous elements of medieval regal actions. Monarchs and sovereigns occasionally would attire as commoners, distribute sustenance to the destitute, or enact other deeds of intentional humiliation, but perpetually in meticulously governed scenarios that eventually fortify their dominance. Isabella's supposed denial to swap her undergarments aligns flawlessly with this model, a communal exhibition of private piety that functioned to heighten her ethereal standing, even while it debased her corporeal state. The gender-related dimensions of this legend are comparably noteworthy. In medieval culture, female forms were regarded as naturally unclean and hazardous, origins of allure and transgression that necessitated continual oversight and restraint. For a female to adopt this uncleanness deliberately was to claim possession of her presumed corruption, to metamorphose it from a font of disgrace into a font of strength. Isabella's utmost impurity also functioned to desexualize her in a fashion that was essential for her governmental endurance. As a woman leader in a man-ruled domain, she required to separate herself from conventional womanly duties and anticipations. By rendering her physique repellent through disregard, she forged a guarding perimeter that permitted her to operate as a governmental head sans being diminished to a sensual entity. The functional truths of medieval intimates render the Isabella legend even more alarming when inspected closely. The flaxen chemises donned by affluent females in the 15th century weren't basic outfits, but elaborate assemblies designed to contour and bolster the form. They typically comprised numerous strata of material with complex joins and clasps that would have captured humidity, microbes, and invaders. After weeks or months of ceaseless donning, such attires would have evolved into nurseries for a range of microorganisms. The temperate damp setting crafted by unclean flax would have fostered the proliferation of bacteria, yeasts, and other disease agents. The prickling and scorching feelings induced by these entities would have been interpreted by Isabella as ethereal ordeals, proof of her advancing intimacy with the Almighty. The mental systems that enabled Isabella to withstand such circumstances resemble those noted in current instances of utmost devotional commitment. The human psyche possesses an astonishing aptitude to reinterpret affliction as significant, to alchemize agony into intent. Isabella's supposed denial to swap her undergarments wasn't mere self-punishment, but a refined type of emotional fortification that permitted her to extract ethereal fulfillment from corporeal unease. The larger European backdrop of the late 1400s assists in elucidating why such extreme conduct was not just endured, but exalted. This constituted an age of fervent religious and governmental turmoil, when established assurances were being disputed by fresh findings and notions. The Protestant upheaval was yet decades distant, but the Catholic structure was already contending to uphold its sway amid rising disapproval and decay. In this atmosphere, personalities like Isabella, who showcased extraordinary commitment to the creed, were viewed as emblems of optimism, evidence that authentic Christianity could still prosper despite the trials of the contemporary realm. Her supposed readiness to forfeit her physical solace for ethereal growth rendered her a potent icon of religious genuineness, a breathing holy figure who could motivate others toward heightened piety. The mechanical restrictions of the period also rendered Isabella's supposed conduct more fathomable. In an era lacking contemporary piping, lather, or grasp of microbes, upholding individual sanitation was an ongoing strife, even for the prosperous. The disparity between pure and soiled was frequently a question of extent rather than category, and someone who selected to adopt utmost impurity was merely extending an inherent propensity to its rational terminus. The safeguarding of Isabella's prestige, despite these claims, speaks to the intricate manners in which historical recollection is built and sustained. Rather than being recalled as a lunatic or extremist, she is broadly honored as one of Spain's premier rulers, the sovereign who merged the nation and initiated its era of prosperity. The legend of her unwashed intimates has turned into a marginal note to her chronicle rather than its primary motif. This choosy remembrance mirrors the persistent influence of the Spanish crown and Catholic institution to mold historical accounts. Tales that could harm Isabella's image are minimized or rejected, while those that augment her ethereal authority are retained and lauded. The outcome is a purified rendition of the past that conceals the odder and more unsettling facets of medieval existence. The healing repercussions of Isabella's supposed conduct would have extended well past individual unease. Extended donning of unwashed intimates can trigger severe dermal contaminations, urinary pathway troubles, and other wellness concerns that might have impacted her capacity to govern efficiently. Some scholars have proposed that her documented cerebral volatility during the subsequent years of her rule may have linked to infections stemming from inadequate sanitation. The communal ramifications of the Isabella legend reach into the current era. In numerous regions worldwide, utmost devotional commitment is still conveyed through purposeful self-disregard and corporeal agony. The identical mental systems that allegedly propelled Isabella to maintain unwashed intimates for months persist in inspiring modern ascetics and visionaries who perceive physical ease as a barrier to ethereal progress. The lasting strength of this legend also mirrors our ongoing intrigue with the crossroads of authority, faith, and intimacy. The vision of a commanding sovereign existing in self-enforced grime touches upon profound societal worries about womanly dominance, religious radicalism, and the bond between communal and personal existence. It prompts us that even the most commanding individuals are bound to the same organic truths as all others, that beneath the spectacle of regal life resides the same disordered, uncomfortable, mortal tissue that we all possess. The inquiry of whether Isabella truly forged and upheld her supposed oath may matter less than what the legend discloses about the society she dwelled in. A community where utmost religious commitment was prized over individual solace, where impurity was perceived as a marker of ethereal purity, and where Europe's most potent female could be exalted for donning the same intimates for months. The boundary between holiness and lunacy had grown perilously slender. As morning illuminates the Alhambra in Granada, 5 centuries following Isabella's presumed victory, the early glow exposes a metropolis altered. The springs that once supplied the Islamic cleansings now irrigate Christian landscapes. The symmetrical designs that once embellished the barriers have been supplanted by emblems and venerated figures. The summons to devotion that once resounded from towers has been muted eternally, replaced by the ringing of sanctuary chimes. But in the dimness of the antique residences, if you attend closely, you can still detect the murmur of material against epidermis, the scrape of nails against flax, the quiet invocation of a sovereign who held that redemption could be discovered in the most personal shapes of torment. The legend of Isabella's intimates may be untrue, but the society that birthed it, a society where celestial and mortal, hallowed and worldly, untainted and defiled, coexisted in perpetual uneasy nearness, was utterly authentic. Ultimately, perhaps the most alarming facet of this tale is not whether Isabella truly wore the same intimates for months, but that we inhabit a realm where such conduct could be viewed as not merely tolerable, but divine. The lice that supposedly swarmed her garb have long perished, but the notions that permitted them to prosper, the conviction that corporeal agony leads to ethereal growth, that purity is a variety of conceit, that the form is a foe to be vanquished rather than a shrine to be revered, continue to influence our realm in manners both understated and deep. The sovereign who may never have swapped her intimates prompts us that the past is not merely a assemblage of timelines and conflicts, but a chronicle of human decisions, human convictions, and human forms existing and perishing in states that would be inconceivable to us now. Her narrative, whether authentic or fabricated, unlocks a portal into a realm where Europe's most potent female could be exalted for adopting the very states that would horrify us today, and where the boundary between commitment and debasement was delineated not by logic or ease, but by conviction solely.